Well, happy Saturday afternoon, everyone. I hope this cloudy day is making your world, bringing to your world what you need it to make you feel the best you can. So, some people ask me if the things I put on here are scripted, and they're not. I just simply, in a conversational manner, try and relay some of the things that are on my spirit. And this is something that's been on my heart for a couple of days because I'm seeing it in the world. And maybe sharing some of these thoughts will make you go, something to consider. So the question is, are you still wanting the apple? Now, what does that mean? So let's hop in the book for a minute and go all the way back to the garden. I want you to imagine for a moment a very tranquil and placid place before the fall. You have Adam and then you have Eve, theoretically enjoying a life without toil. The animals are at their beck and call. Maybe the climate is very, very different. But the point is, it's a paradise replete with everything they need being brought to them or readily available, without them having to scrape and go after it. And then, of course, the only caveat to that is the apple. Don't eat the apple, or things aren't going to work out for you. You're going to die, is essentially what God says. So, of course, we all know the story. The serpent comes along and says, hey, what does God know that you don't know? And one thing leads to another, and, well, then the fall ensues. So, and of course, that separates man from God, because essentially what has happened is that, every relationship has a set of boundaries. And I don't know about you, but if someone was providing everything for me, and I had an almost tranquil and beautiful life, I'd be in a situation where, well, we would like to think that we wouldn't want for anything else. But maybe if you default to human nature, look at all the lottery winners who, are broke 2 years later because the money didn't solve the problems they had internally. And they're either broke or severely depressed, or statistically, things aren't going well for them a couple of years later. So what is eating the fruit? Eating the fruit is actually going and taking matters into your own hands. So we as humans have the gift of our ability to do and create most anything, from glorious buildings to flying vehicles to, watercraft and cars and all the finest art and antiquities you can imagine. The finest silks, the finest carvings, the finest materials. We have the ability to create beauty, luxury, opulence, all of that stuff. All you have to do is wander through medieval Europe, the Renaissance Europe, to look at the ornate structures of the buildings and the craftsmanship that went into the Sistine Chapel. There are men who dedicated their entire lives to creating that beauty. And on one hand, you think to yourself, what a waste of a life. But we may never know who carved and made those beautiful things, but we certainly do appreciate them. And I think those people on the other side, if they, they're aware of that, I think that might be enough for them. Hard to say. But when I say, are you still seeking after the apple? What are you doing in your life that is constantly where you're taking matters into your own hands and pushing forward? A very large thing in the world right now is the law of attraction community, where basically your thoughts create your reality. And this is touted by many gurus and and people that have a perceived level of success. And it goes from mild to wild. You have some people just say, well, you can just have anything you want. And it's true, you can, but it is a journey. And here's what I mean by that. So first of all, let's go back to the garden. Eve's got everything she wants before she eats the apple. But eating the apple is basically saying, I know better than God, and I'm going to take matters into my own hands. And when God finds out about that, he says, well, if you know better than me, you can go know better than you all the time. And so that's where the fall happens. And now, of course, even after the fall happens, yes, technically there's a curse on mankind, but as we move through the book, God has relationships with people after they leave the garden, whether it's Noah or Abraham or all these people that he had relationships with from the standpoint of being able to communicate. I think it's more or less, we could have stayed children in the garden, but maybe part of divine design is, getting up, separating ourselves, and then coming back. Oftentimes people have parents, you grow up and your parents busy telling you not what to do, and you keep pushing against that until eventually you push against it so hard that you find yourself having to go out into the world, either being sent away by your parents, or you leave on your own. It's the same energy. And then years later, you'll often see people lament that. They'll say things like, well, my parents, I guess they knew best after all. And so that's why I say, regardless of these situations that we're in right now, are you seeking the apple? Meaning that, are you just trying to do it all on your own? As you move through the world, one of the things I have noticed and really listened for is statements of I can't in other people. And it's not so much I'm listening for those to draw any kind of a judgment, but our society is largely filled up with people currently, in my observation, and it's not a slight and it's not a praise, it's simply a statement of fact. It's largely replete in a society with people who will tell you what their limitations are. Oh, I can't afford that. Oh, I could never do that. Oh, people don't want that. Oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not beautiful enough. Figure out any statement you like of diminishment, and that is what you're going to see in those people. You're going to see it on a very extreme level. You'll see people who are like, for example, I'm sure everybody knows the person who is like, oh, I'm always broke and there's no good guys or girls. Nothing goes my way. My job is really hard. Just think about all those. You probably know that person. But on the flip side, you can know a person who is very positive, and no matter what circumstance comes up, they're going to find the light in it. And they may even be not 100% true in what they're saying, but they're embracing the attitude. Because quite frankly, given the opportunity to if you have the opportunity to either do something, look at a situation with a positive angle or a negative angle, they are both outlooks. And there's an argument that the outcome could be the same. But we all stand on the shoulders of giants. The biggest, rich people always say it's my positive attitude that got me to where I am, or famous people or successful people in various different areas. It's their attitude that brought them forth and delivered them through even when they faced adversity. But it actually, these concepts of proclaiming who you are actually very biblical. So I may put the references in the thing, but in Proverbs it simply says, by your words you're justified. So what does that mean? Well, let's pretend you come home from work and you drive in your driveway and your house is burned down. There's nothing left. Just a smoldering ash. Now, I know that's an extreme situation, but in that moment, you have two choices. Provided, of course, people haven't, been killed or otherwise, and you get passed out. But let's pretend you live alone in the middle of nowhere and you don't see your house until the last minute before you get there. Now, in that moment, you could be very shocked and dismayed, and most people would be. But that shock and dismay is something you can choose to stay in, or you can choose to free yourself from. So let's pretend, yes, of course, maybe you're shocked and dismayed because it is a quick change to your life. But then you could be in a situation where you're like, wow, this is great. Maybe I get a new house. Maybe I can finally, this is the thing that's decided or is going to make me move away. Maybe this is the thing that is going to create a change in my life that this situation would never have happened. And that's, again, a lot of the really highly motivational people say adversity is really going to shape the next step in your evolution. And it is very much so, sometimes in the Christian faith and many other faiths, there's always these vows of poverty, etc., etc. And I think the vows of poverty, I think people misunderstand it because, as the Bible says, it's harder for a rich man to get into heaven than for a camel to go through an eye of a needle. But that's because the rich man is simply focused on, well, a lot of rich men can simply be focused on the money and the acquisition thereof. But there are plenty of rich people who are miserable because the acquisition thereof is not an edifying or life. Like there's no person who stands out in history long term whose only claim to fame was that they're really rich. And so what I mean by that is that, so for example, the earliest person I can think of in history who is, cosmically rich, and it's talked about the Bible, would be Solomon. He's really rich, but he's also the king. He's also has several wise things he does. So it's not just he was a rich guy. He's actually touted as being the wisest. And I guess as a byproduct of being the wisest, he became the richest. Hard to say. But even wise men can succumb to their scarcity thinking, as you see with Solomon later in the story, where he gives up to, or he's swayed by women from, it's always the women, he's swayed by women from other nations, and you could read the story. But going back to what I was saying is that when you experience an adverse situation, you can look at it and say, okay, I'm going to solve this with my own strength, meaning that you're going after the apple, and you're going to go it alone. Or you can say, okay, this situation is awesome, no matter what. If you just simply, by your words, you're justified. So this situation is awesome, and I'm going to come out the other side and be just like totally much better for it. And I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm going to embrace the fact that that's going to happen. And then you open that door to it. Because prosperity, not only in money, but in your life in general, is anyone who ascribes to the Almighty and the way the creation works. Prosperity is the default setting. And you can see that actually in the Bible. Look at the lilies of the field. Not even Solomon in all of his glory was clothed as well as these. What more will my Father do for you? I mean, that sort of says it up, right? Not wealth for the sake of wealth alone, but a life that is full of prosperity and comfort. We can look at Job's example, and Job's story may actually just be a story of a parable, but so you have Job in the initial phases. He's very wealthy. He's got like 7,000 sheep and 400. He actually gives the number of all of the huge number of livestock and wives he has, and how he lives his life. And he even goes so far, he actually lives in a bit of a scarcity mentality, though, because it says in the book that he routinely will make sacrifices for the sins of his children that they may have made, but he doesn't know that they made or not. I mean, he could very well have just been like, if your mindset is that, oh, my kids are sinning, I better like make a sacrifice for them, and that's when you had to do that. Or the other mindset could have been, my kids are awesome, and they never violate or offend God. Those are two mindsets, right? But again, if you go in the story where God takes everything away and brings great hardship to him, we could say, oh, well, how is that prosperity? Well, you only say that's prosperity when you look at your life in this finite realm. These, I'm not sure how old Job got, maybe a couple hundred years or something, because back then they lived longer. But the point is that you can imagine at the end, imagine for a moment Job's life is over, because God does restore to him his life. But at some point when Job is communing directly with God after he's passed from this reality, Job could say very much to God and say, oh, I'm really upset about my kids dying and not being able to enjoy them. And God would be like, well, we are infinite, and here we are in this infinite realm, and oh, there's your kids over there, you can go hang out with them. And as well, Job gets the luxury, well, not the luxury, but the privilege. It's a privilege, actually, where he is put in a situation where his story then goes throughout the world, and, well, that's quite a feather in your cap. So oftentimes we'll look at Christ's life, and people say that, well, he was poor, he came with nothing and wandered around with nothing. But a lot of people don't. When you actually provide a context, Christ is actually the original Superman. I mean, here you have a fellow who can walk on water. He can multiply food just with his will. He can get money out of the mouths of fishes. And that's pretty spectacular. And those are only the works, basic works we know of. I mean, when you live a life for a few years, being able to chronicle every minute is hard. But we'll base our assumption on that circumstance. But I mean, essentially, Christ himself actually says that, you actually have to have an abundance mindset. So for example, if you look in Matthew 13, this is after Christ tells the story about the thorns and the thistles. But and the disciples say to him, why do you speak to people in parables? And Christ replies, because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom has been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. But whoever does not have, even what they have, will be taken from them. That is why I speak in parables. Though seeing they do not see, though hearing they do not hear or understand. So that's quite a statement, isn't it? Those who don't have, more will be taken from them. Doesn't that go completely against your ideas about how you have to live in a state of lack? And living in a state of lack is the mindset of the world right now, where, we see the things that are going on. I have mentioned the things that are going on, and you could interpret it as being negative. Or more or less, these are statements of fact. Because, for example, let's think about Judas for a minute. Christ already knew the nature of Judas well before he was betrayed. But Judas had a role to play. Judas actually had to be the one to sell him out. And so maybe that's why Christ kept him around. These are things we will never know, but you can be sure, based on the wisdom of Christ, that he knew the deal with Judas. So as we look at the world right now, it's funny, I was watching a video with Jeff Bezos from 1999, before the original .com crash. And he's being interviewed about Amazon, and he's going out his way to say, yeah, we're going to have services going to be number one. And they say, well, what about the internet? His response is internet schminternet. People are going to want to deal with us regardless of how they contact us because of the efficient service we're going to bring and the quality of the service. And it's very noble and et cetera, but he also, in that interview, he talks about how the internet's going to be so big, and he doesn't know exactly who's going to be the most successful or going to fail. And little did he know, after this interview, I think a couple months after this interview, the whole thing fell apart, and Amazon, that had been the darling of the dot-com boom, fell quite a bit. It was a great time to buy, and then of course became the behemoth they are today, right? Along with the other, the Googles, the Yahoos, the eBays, all that kind of stuff. But that's why I say that's the you never know how things are going to play out, but it's always important to pay attention to the framework of what's happening in a given time. So those of us who are aware, I do a lot of talking about having discernment. And discernment is, look at society in general. Discernment is lacking. If you look at the average waistline of our society, you have a huge number of people who aren't, maybe they know it, but they aren't providing the discernment that says, if you eat that extra bag of chips, it's going to go straight to your ass, right? And they may know that, but that the discernment of then having to try and lose that weight will be exponentially harder. Debt, look at the debt in our society. The discernment that's required to say, okay, if you get that third mortgage on your house and get that one extra easy payment plan for that thing you want, whether it's a gadget, a car, or some furniture, it's going to be harder for you to rectify. That discernment is missing. And that's why the instruction in the Bible was, look at the Lord's Prayer. Our Father art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and lead us not into temptation, but forgive us from evil. So, temptation. In the Bible, one of the major tempters of all of the major players was actually their relationships. God always said, don't become unequally yoked. And he was talking about, oftentimes the men in the Bible would marry women from other faiths. And men want to please, and so they'll have relationships with, say you're a Christian, you have a relationship with a woman who worships Baal. Well, maybe she's going to be like, oh, why don't you just come to the Baal ceremony with me? And a little yeast leavens the whole loaf, and then there it is. I mean, let's take Samson for a minute. I'm going to tell you right now, I have this thought very often. But think of the absurdity of the Samson story here. You have someone who's so strong, and he's able to hold back so many great tides. And over the course of the Bible, Delilah slowly betrays him by trying to find out his weakness so she can share it with the guys who want to take him out. And after the first time, he would be suspicious for sure. After the second time, he would have to know. And by it came to the third time, he was just so blinded by his desire for Delilah, and his desire was probably married into love. And so again, that is him, was Delilah the divine selection for Samson? It's hard to say because we wouldn't have the story without her, right? And, after the fact, imagine Samson in heaven talking to God about the whole circumstance. Again, God can say, well, you lived a certain period of time in that earthly form, and now we're taking your story and imparting it upon all the other spirits that come after you, because you're going to be part of the winnowing process. You are going to be part of the body of information that the people I want to hang out with will absorb. Because just like in the garden, God said, hey, don't eat the fruit, it's not going to work out for you. That was actually a test. Because at the end of the day, of course, God wants obedience, but obedience is housed in a framework. For example, you have small children. Your small child has to be obedient to you to a degree in order for you to have a healthy relationship. And when the child steps out of that framework, you have to correct them, or your relationship, the quality of your relationship will suffer. And of course, they'll grow up and go on their own way and establish themselves, and then your relationship changes, and then their obedience, it changes from obedience to you to obedience to the greater good. And so, as I said, the apple was a test for man in that early state. But this thing we're going through right now, this, my friends, is a test. Every adversity you've ever faced is a test. You know, the book doesn't exist by accident. And of course, it's perfectly reasonable to suspect that the book has been altered in certain ways. For example, the Bible at one time had 200 books to it. And you had guys get together in a weekend and, decide what they were going to do. And there may very well have been some manipulation of the information and the texts by the powers that be, because that does stand to reason. But the core message and the core goodness is still there. And the discerning among us, because some of us are great carpenters, some of us are great cooks, chefs, some of us are great mechanical thinkers, and some of us are actually good at breaking down the larger picture that is the way the world, the way circumstances are going to shape you, and how you could deal with them in the world. And so as the body, we all come together and we say, okay, I'm going to bring you my skills so we can, when they raise a barn, when the Mennonites go and raise a barn, 100 guys show up. Not every guy who shows up is good at throwing a hammer. Some guys are better with a saw. Some guys are better with reading blueprints. Some guys are better at pouring concrete. The women that show up, they're not going to be throwing a hammer or using a saw. They're going to nurture the men. So like I said, going back to the apple, in this circumstance right now, if you're thinking of ways that you can, of course, it's important to think about ways you can deal with it. For myself personally, you basically want to be in a situation where you can place an order with the universe being God. You can say, this is precisely what I want. But if you look, for example, at Steve Jobs, and Steve Jobs, towards the end of his life, I think he had some sin which really manifested in his physicality. But, he's very famously quoted as saying, you can't see the path ahead of you, but when you look behind you, you can see how everything worked perfectly in unison. And so, yes, of course, when Israel was in Egypt, as I've said in the past, one of the options could very well have been to take over Egypt. But as I've also said in the past, God actually knew, just like he knew with Judas, that they wouldn't be strong enough to do that. And also, in the time when the plagues were being unleashed upon the people, you can right well imagine, because I believe the estimates are that there was about 1.5 million Israelites in Egypt at the time. But you can right well imagine that within those 7 plagues, there had to have been many who swore off God and maybe embraced the security greater of their Egyptian households. These are things we'll never know, because I'm sure inside the plagues there was a winnowing that went on there as well. And that winnowing goes on, they have the 7 plagues, they go into the desert, the Red Sea parts, Pharaoh gets eliminated from behind them, and then they have to go to the land of the Promised Land, and then once again, they're terrified by the ominous prospect of dealing with the giants in the land. And these are all processes of God winnowing out who gets to deserve. And at the end, he basically says to the bulk of them, sorry, I've done all this good stuff for you, and you still don't believe. So you can't have the abundance that's planned in the way. I mean, you can very well bet when they had to remain in the wilderness, I mean, they still lived godly lives, and I'm sure that when they died, I mean, that's up for God to deal with, right? But that advancement in the flesh was not allowed for them. Because God certainly does, at the end of the day, by example in the book, he does want to keep people safe. So look in the Bible where he looks to deliver people from hardship before the ultimate hardship before it arrives. He looks to deliver them. You look at Lot. You know, Abraham has to make a deal and try to save. God says, I'm going to be destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. And so Abraham finally gets to the point where at least he's able to save a certain number of people. You look at Noah. God creates a way for, I mean, let's be honest. If there had been people who, instead of, you know, the Bible talks about how people taunted Noah while he was building his boat and all that, but had there been people, maybe Noah's children, maybe the wives of Noah's sons, you know, maybe they themselves, you know, had a moment of clarity where they realized that that's what needed to be done. And it's to some degree a degree of faith, because, you know, when Noah's busy swinging a hammer on a dry day for a giant boat in the middle of a field, that does require a certain amount of faith. That's why you have to put your faith in the fact that you're going to be directed in ways that you cannot see yet. And so, will there be a final sacrifice? Well, I mean, the body of Christ along the way throughout history has had sacrifices that are made in this flesh. And it's unfortunate when people meet their demise and we don't know what their walk was precisely inside that, but God's core example throughout the book is I will deliver you from things that are going to be beyond the scope of what you can handle. And ultimately, not only will I deliver you, but I will restore unto you the years that the locusts have taken from you. But in order for the restoration to occur, you must analyze yourself. And this goes back to what I was saying. Do not be eating the apple. Simply say to yourself, okay, when you choose to manifest your reality, which is by Christ's own words, whoever has will be given more, and they will have abundance. So, in the Bible it also says, let the weak say, I am strong. Beat your plowshares into swords, and let the weak say, I am strong. That sentence, let the weak say, I am strong, you can change that sentence to, let the poor say, I am rich. Let the sick say, I am healthy. Let the dim say, I'm bright. Yeah, it's funny, I know. But that's my point, is that by your words you're justified. So do yourself a little favor. What I myself do, I mean, it's one thing to pray and things like that, but what I do, I just keep a book. I keep a book, and all I simply do is I used to do this every day, but now I do it maybe once a week. And I simply write a little story as to what I'm thankful for in the means of a letter. So I'm thankful God for my excellent health. I'm thankful that my brain and body function perfectly. I'm thankful that everyone enjoys spending time with me. I'm thankful that the desires of my heart have arrived and I feel blessed for them. And it could just be any number of statements you want to make about yourself. Even just as a comical thing. And I believe God, I mean, when God talks about lambs lying with lions and all that kind of stuff, I think that God has a playful spirit. And so I'll even do things like write down that I'm thankful for the free cup of coffee I got, or just something small. And the beauty of that is that I can actually go, I've got books and books like that written, and I actually can go back and I can see the day that I wrote that. And it's basically writing a prayer. So whether you're actually, dear God, thank you for this, that, and the other thing, or you're saying, dear God, thank you for this, that, and the other thing, you can actually go back if you've written it down and you can see where it happens. Because oftentimes what I've shared with friends is that, you know, if you can make muffins, you know, flour, milk, sugar, salt, baking soda, all the ingredients with muffins. If you can make muffins, you can make wedding cake. It is simply scale. And that is, and by permission of the Almighty himself, because it's very easy to read the book about, oh, we got to have sacrifice, and we got to do this and that, but really none of it is sacrifice. You know, because we live in this finite realm, and the challenge we as people have is that we are always in a circumstance where we are looking at this, we're looking at our bank balance, we're looking at the clock, we're looking at the calendar, we're looking at the lines on our face, we're looking at how soon we want to get gratification. And those are desires, but where you take your hand off the apple and you say, I really enjoy this garden that I'm living in, is by simply detailing what you want. So if you want to be rich, why do you want to be rich? Is it because you want, you know, I want to be rich because I want a Lamborghini. I want to be rich because I want the best house ever. But why do you want to be a Lamborghini and the best house ever? If it's on the core level, if it's just to have people see you in your Lamborghini or your best house ever and go, wow, that guy's got the coolest Lamborghini and the best house ever, that's going to be a problem, because that's going to be a meal that you are not going to be satisfied with long term. Yes, of course, when people see in your Lamborghini once or twice and they come up to you and go, wow, nice Lamborghini, you'll be like, yeah, I know, isn't that great? But after a while, it's like even rich people get tired of their possessions because their possessions do not quench their thirst. That goes back to the Bible where it's, you know, drink from my cup and you'll never be thirsty, right? And so finding satisfaction where you are and assuming that God has his hand on everything is taking your hand off the apple and leaving it in the tree. Of course, it's important to notice things. You know, we see the Bible talks about the end days where, you know, buying and selling is going to be an issue without the mark. And there's some talk about that now, and that's an interesting thing to observe. Whether you think the injection is that or not, that's again up to your discernment. Because ultimately, I believe people who are truly on board with God will be able to discern and see the dangers. And some of you who've taken it, maybe you don't see a danger, and that's fine. But then again, you must also analyze yourself to determine if your walk is really with the Almighty. Because make no mistake, the Pharisees, they all thought they were right. The crowd who was nailing Christ to the tree, the reason, I've said this in another video in the past, the same crowd that was chanting, crucify him, is the same crowd that was saying, rah, rah, yay team, when Christ came in on Palm Sunday. Now on Palm Sunday, Christ knew the deal. He knew that these people would be doing that. And so hence, forgive them, they know not what they do, is simply because they were coming from they all had their hands on the apple. They were eating it because they expected Christ to come in with a sword and vanquish everything and make that. He expected them to, they expected Christ to come in and make them great. And the only person that can make you great is you. I'm going to say that again. The only person that can make you great is you through divine allowance. As I've said, you say, if you yourself want to be great, and what is greatness? Maybe you want to become the world's greatest carpenter. Maybe you want to become the world's greatest, landowner or landlord, or who knows. Everybody has a feeling inside them of what they want to be great. And maybe they just have an idea of a feeling they want. But there's no one who said, I want to be the richest guy so I can lay on the beach. Because you may say that in your person right now. You may say, I want to be the world's richest guy laying on the beach. But odds are very high that a couple of years into it, you'd be very, the guys that are tooting around the golf course, that's why people drop dead when they were 5 years after they retire. Because you can only scream around the golf course so many times till you're going, what am I doing? Right? So anyway, the point I'm making is that take your hand off the apple. Take your hand off the apple. For sure, be very attentive to what's going on. Should you be preparing? Well, the Bible says, use the story of the bridesmaids. All they had to do was keep a little bit of extra oil in their lamps. They didn't have to have a tanker truck of oil behind them, but they had to have some extra oil in their lamps. Have good abilities. You got to know that Gideon and his buddies, before they headed into Canaan, made sure they could do 100 push-ups. They probably could do 100 push-ups anyway, but they were physically capable. Not only, if God was going to send them into battle, they weren't busy eating chicken legs and being taken in on stretchers. No, they were probably very capable people. Your money, mind your money. We're coming into a situation now where the money, it's a big deal. I'm going to do another video on what I think about. I drilled into that the other day about, the 3 options you have as we pull into the future. But I'm just going to point some things out to you, and I'm only pointing these things out to you. You can take it or leave it. But I feel I've been given the gift of discernment from the standpoint of being able to see some of the bigger picture. So yeah. Anyway, I hope these messages reach you in a way that is pertinent and touches your soul. And if you do want to reach out to me and talk more about that, I'm going to be making my YouTube channel a little more active. I mean, I've used it in my other business dealings a little bit, but I'm going to make it more active in this area. So as they always say, like, comment, subscribe. And the only reason is likes just basically make more people potentially see it. And I feel that this message for everybody has a lot of value. And I hope especially it has a lot of value for you. So like I say, take your hand off the apple.